13. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast, and they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
In this Republican power asking for the separation of church and state to be broken down. What we just heard was Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, who is from Colorado. And she's giving this speech, or this sermon, I guess, at a church there, where she says straight up that the church should direct the state. Now, for those who know about Bible prophecy, this should be sending alarm bells off in your head, because it seems as though something that Adventists have been talking about for a long time and others are starting to cue into, this Republican power, especially the political side of things, are really becoming quite loud in this church-state issue. Have you seen that yourself?
It's definitely becoming much more religious, and it's taking this what is not necessarily a bad thing, which is trying to turn to God, but in the whole scheme of things, we see how that is playing into the exact plan that the New World Order agenda is trying to push. So we have the movement on the one side that is no God, all these things, and then the far right that is saying we need God back in the country, we need God leading the country, even more than just individuals seeing that there is a necessity for them being connected with God.
And what's most concerning to me right now is that most of it are coming from people who are making laws and interpreting and passing laws, whether that is the House of Representatives, Congress, the White House, or the Supreme Court. All of those entities right now are headed by Roman Catholics. The head of the Congress, when the vice president isn't there, is Roman Catholic. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is Roman Catholic. 7 of 9 judges on the Supreme Court are Roman Catholic, although most people say 6. Neil Gorsuch is a Catholic. When you look at his background, it's 7. And then the president is Catholic. And when you look at Catholic doctrine, which we're going to do a little bit today our goal is to look at the history of this issue. You'll see that the Catholic doctrine and the Constitution cannot stand together.
They're diametrically opposed.
Exactly.
What America was founded on is the exact opposite of that. It was church and state separation entirely.
And the papacy said as much in the past in their writings that show that the papacy hates the Constitution. They call it a pestilential error, if I recall correctly. So what we're trying to do here, there's going to be people who watch this, and we've seen some of the comments before. Oh, don't listen to these guys. They're Seventh-day Adventists, and Seventh-day Adventism is not to be listened to. It's a cult and all of these things. Well, as a guy who was never a Christian and never a Seventh-day Adventist to come converted into this stuff, it was only because of I could see what the Bible was saying by guidance of the Holy Spirit was exactly what Adventism was preaching. And that is this unification of church and state coming in the future. And we see now that the religious right is making noise to that effect. Now, there's going to be people, I'd like to read a quote from the book, The Great Controversy, and try to help people understand that this is not a Seventh-day Adventist issue. This is a Bible and a salvation issue. And we're trying to help people get ready, regardless of denomination. We're not against any Protestant denomination. We're not against people in the Catholic Church. We're trying to speak out against principalities and powers and expose the rulers of darkness that are running and operating this world. Our goal is to help educate people. And we understand in advance that they're not going to believe us.
Church and state coming together doesn't only affect a certain group of people, it affects everyone. Because depending on who's making the rules, that's the religious understanding that the rules are going to apply to. And that's exactly opposite of what America was founded on, which was freedom of religion, freedom of believing what you would have and practice how you would have.
And that's why we understand in advance when we talk about this stuff, the vast majority of people out there are not going to believe what we're saying today about church and state being united in the future in the United States. I'd like to read this quote from The Great Controversy, where she touches on this same issue. It says there, God's people predictions that religious intolerance would gain control in the United States, that church and state would unite to persecute those who keep the commandments of God, have been pronounced as groundless and absurd. It has been confidently declared that this land could never become anything other than what it had been in the past, the defender of religious freedom. In every generation, God has sent his servants to rebuke sin, both in the world and in the church. But the people desire to hear smooth things, and the pure, unvarnished truth is not accepted. So one of the challenges we have as delivering this information, trying to help people understand what's coming, is we already know in advance that they're going to say what we're saying right now is groundless and absurd, and that the United States could not possibly be anything other than what it always has been, a defender of religious freedom. But we see that the Bible tells us that's not actually going to be the case in the future.
That's exactly what the opposite of what the Bible says will happen. And it tells us that in Revelation. It says that there is this power that it represents, or that it says is like to a lamb. And that's exactly what America, when it was rising up based on republicanism, constitution, the individual rights, that's what everything was based on. It was lamb-like. Because that's the principle that God has, that everybody is able to make their own choice. We need to be able to choose, not be forced to love God. And if we choose not, then we choose not. But it says, in the later verses that that lamb-like beast will speak like a dragon. And we know that to be the case. And we see little hints of this coming, this dragon talk.
That's exactly what it is. This is when you hear Boebert speak, the church should direct the state. That is directly from Satan's line of thinking, the dragon's line of thinking. Now, for people who say, well, what are you talking about? Why would the Bible say something like this? And why are you guys spending time talking about this? It really is focused on the third angel's message in Revelation 14. It's all three angels' messages, but we're kind of zooming in today on that third angel's message.
So we'll read here in Revelation 14, verse 9. And it says, "And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand." So it's very important about this image and the worship of the beast.
Yes. So we have three main elements here. The worship, which is what the dragon is most interested in, right? We have the beast, and we have his image, which we know represents America. And for those people who are wondering who the dragon and the beast and the image and the false prophet and all these things are, we recommend going to adtv.watch over YouTube specifically, because you can bookmark now on adtv.watch important points as you go through the video and save them on a dashboard so you can share with other people. But go to adtv.watch and look up Two Beasts, an Image of the Beast, a Revelation 13 study. And that will give you the background you need to understand these things. And you can save the points as you're going through the video for your own study to share with people later. It's really a great tool to try. And in doing that, now we can kind of move forward, establishing that we already know what we're looking at is Satan's system using the papacy in the United States. If you have questions about that, go watch that other video. But that's kind of where we're operating now. And really what this third angel's message is describing is this false union of dragon, beast, and false prophet. That is the same as the worship, the beast, and his image. You're dealing with the same three powers there. So just to establish, the Bible has told us to warn people about this worship, this beast, this image, and this mark that's coming. And we'll find a larger description of these powers in Revelation 13, 11 through 15. Now, there's other places to determine these things, but this is kind of the most compact, succinct description that we have to give us an idea of what we're dealing with. And what we're dealing with is this religious right power will eventually be successful by some means or another in creating united church and state system, a united church and state system. So I wanted to quickly read through Revelation 11 through 15 and kind of do some commentary on it as we go through it to give people an understanding on why we're talking about church and state and what we expect America will do before we kind of go back in history.
And we're not talking about all the people that are in these systems. We're talking about the principles behind the systems themselves. And when we look into history, we see that the papacy was a church-state government. And we've seen what happened. That was during the Dark Ages. This was the papacy ruling in place of the state and making laws, religious laws, and persecuting people. And we see that that is exactly what it is going back to and what the Bible says it's going back to. It will use this other nation, America, to impart its ideology to the people and to enforce these things. And looking here in Revelation 13, it shows this exactly.
Yeah, so let's quickly run through this. And I'm going to kind of change the language out so it reads a little bit more real world-like and not so imagery-like. It says, "And I beheld another kingdom coming out of the earth, and it had two horns like a lamb," so they're going to be Christ-like, but he ends up speaking like a dragon, ends up speaking like Satan. So it's going to be a nation that comes up after 1798 that will be based on what look like Christian principles, but in the end will eventually speak like Satan. It says, "And he," this is America, "exercises all the power of the first beast, of the papacy before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast. Okay, so this is saying America is going to have all the power that Rome, the Vatican used to have, that they no longer have. And when they used to have the power, Mackenzie, what was the power of the Vatican during that 1260? It was the unification, right?
Yep. They had total control over everything. They made all the rules. They were in charge. They drove through the armies and through the political system so that it wasn't directly in effect them. They could say, oh no, it was the political entity. But the whole agenda that was being driven was theirs, and they were the ones dictating there. And they took the title Pontifex Maximus, which is the supreme leader. So they took that, right? And that is exactly what we're seeing here. That it's going to take this second beast, but it's going to make it so that everybody worships the first beast, or the beast that was ruling during the 1260 years of the Dark Ages, from 538 to 1798.
Which we're going to cover.
To retake America in 1812 on behalf of the Khazarian Mafia, but fails, once again because of Russian interference. This failure enraged the Rothschild KM, and they once again plot eternal revenge against both the Russians and the American colonists, and plan to infiltrate and hijack both nations, and asset strip, tyrannize, and then mass murder both nations and their populace. Continuing on, we've been at this for a while. The Rothschilds and their English oligarchy that surrounded them plot ways to retake America, and this became their main obsession. Their favorite plan is to set up an American central bank featuring Babylonian money magic, usury, illegal taxation, aka theft, and secret counterfeiting.
Although geographically separate, the city-states of London, the Vatican, and the District of Columbia are one interlocking empire called Empire of the City. The flag of Washington's District of Columbia has 3 red stars, one for each city-state in the 3-city empire. This corporate empire of 3 city-states controls the world economically through London's inner city, militarily through the District of Columbia, and spiritually through the Vatican. The Constitution for the District of Columbia operates under a tyrannical Roman law known as Lex Fori, which bears no resemblance to the U.S. Constitution. When Congress passed the Act of 1871, it created a separate corporate government for the District of Columbia. This treasonous act allowed the District of Columbia to operate as a corporation outside the original Constitution of the United States and outside of the best interests of American citizens. Sobering study of the signed treaties and charters between Britain and the United States exposes a shocking truth. The United States has always been, and still is, a British Crown colony. King James I was famous not for just changing the Bible into the King James Version, but for signing the first Charter of Virginia in 1606. That charter granted America's British forefathers a license to settle and colonize America. The charter also guaranteed that future kings and queens of England would have sovereign authority over all the citizens and colonized land in America stolen from the Indians. After America declared its independence from Great Britain, the Treaty of 1783 was signed. That treaty specifically identifies the King of England as the Prince of the United States and contradicts the belief that America won the War of Independence. Although King George III of England gave up most of his claims over his American colonies, he kept his right to continue receiving payment for his business venture of colonizing America. If America had really won the War of Independence, they would never have agreed to pay debts and reparations to the King of England. When Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the U.S. President was made subservient to the King of England. The 13th Amendment is called the Title of Nobility Amendment and forbids U.S. presidents and their officials from using royal titles like king or prince or baron. For some mysterious reason, the 13th Amendment, which was ratified in 1810, no longer appears on current copies of the Constitution. America's blood-soaked War of Independence against the British bankrupted America and turned its citizens into permanent debt slaves of the king. In the War of 1812, the British torched and burned to the ground the White House and all U.S. government buildings and destroyed ratification records of the U.S. Constitution. 1 century later, a corrupt U.S. Congress committed the biggest theft in world history. They passed Paul Warburg's Federal Reserve Act in 1913, handing over America's gold and silver reserves and total control of America's economy to the Rothschild banksters.
In 1913, the Rothschild KM was able to establish a beachhead by bribing crooked, treasonous members of Congress to pass the illegal, unconstitutional Federal Reserve Act on Christmas Eve without a required quorum. The act was then signed by crooked, bought-off President Woodrow Wilson, number 28, who was a traitor to America, like the members of Congress who voted for it. And look, I found pictures of Woodrow Wilson. Look at
Our Federal Reserve is the government. It is not. The Fed is a privately owned banking system whose majority Class A shareholders are the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Kuhn and Loeb, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Israel Seif, and the Lehman Brothers. This private banking cartel is the Fed and is never audited and never pays taxes. They print and design America's money, which displays their symbols of an Egyptian pyramid, a Masonic all-seeing eye, and the words "In God We Trust."
At about the same time that they created their illegal usury tax system in America, they also bribed members of Congress to approve the Internal Revenue Service, 1862, which is their private collection agency incorporated in Puerto Rico.
U.S. citizens believe that the United States is a country and that the president is the most powerful man on earth. The United States is not a country. It is a corporation, and the president is president of the corporation of the United States. He and his elected officials work for the corporation, not for the American people. Since the United States is a corporation, who owns the corporation of the United States? Like Canada and Australia, whose leaders are prime ministers of the Queen, and whose land is called Crown Land, the United States is just another crown colony. Crown colonies are controlled by the empire of 3 city-states. At the center of each city-state is a towering, phallic-shaped stone monument called an obelisk that points skyward. In D.C. city-state, the obelisk, known as the Washington Monument, was dedicated to Freemason George Washington by the Freemason Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. The secretive Brotherhood of Freemasons laid the Washington obelisk's cornerstone in 1848 and contributed 22 Masonic memorial stones. 250 Masonic lodges financed the Washington Monument obelisk, including the Knights Templar Masonic Order. At the heart of London city-state is a 187-ton, 69-foot-tall Egyptian obelisk called Cleopatra's Needle. It was transported from Egypt and erected on the banks of the River Thames. In Vatican City, another Egyptian obelisk towers high above St. Peter's Square.
The Rothschild KM deployed the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia to extract incredibly savage, bloody revenge on innocent Russians, which they had plotted for many years. Ever since Khazaria was destroyed, they preceded research on the Red Terror or the Bolshevik Cheka, or watched the classic movies.
Should be killed. This is pretty huge. This is essentially saying if you're alive during this time period and you don't go along with this unified church-state system, they're going to kill you. And that's a pretty big thing to warn people about, wouldn't you say?
This is very serious. And that's why we're talking about it, because this is a total flip from the lamb-like principle to the dragon principle, because that's what the devil wants in the end. That's his New World Order agenda, is to have worship for himself and to get rid of or exterminate all those who don't want to follow his way.
Which is exactly what Revelation 12 points us to. And the dragon, Satan, was wroth with the woman, the church, and meant to make war with the remnant, those who are left not following after the worshiping of this image. He's going to make war on these people. And so the third angel's message says, tell people about this coming system. And then Revelation 13 11 through 15 kind of shows us what we're up against. So when we're looking around the world and all the movements that are happening, including at the papacy and the UN, what we really need to be paying attention to is America and Protestantism. And I'll quickly touch on in verse 11 where it says it had two horns like a lamb. Let's quickly decode that. And for people who don't understand it, go back and watch some of our material on adtv.watch to understand where we get some of this from. But the two horns are republicanism and Protestantism. That's what the American foundation was built on. Oddly enough, by the last state, when it speaks like a dragon, it will be republicanism and Protestantism in their fallen forms that bring about this image. So the same horns that it identified to make it this bastion of freedom and religion's individual choice and privacy rights and all of these things based on the individual, in the end, it'll be the fallen version of those two horns, republicanism and Protestantism, that will bring about it speaking like a dragon. And that's exactly what we saw when we heard Lauren Boebert say that she believes, as others do in the civil government of the United States, that the church should direct the state.
But now, I think people forget when it's talking about those two horns, republicanism and Protestantism, what were they protesting? Because we don't know anymore. Protestants don't even know why they protested, why they even came to America. Oh, they came over on a ship and it's all, just a nice little story. But there was a real reason why they came to America and why they founded America. It was because they were leaving the oppression of the papal system. That is the whole reason that America was formed. They were leaving this church state to become a free country. And now we're wanting to go and work our way all the way back to having the exact same power ruling us, but not only us, the entire world. And that's what the Bible says is going to happen. So we're going to take a look and see exactly how this did happen before and how this is coming about right now. Because this concept of separation of church and state is crucial for freedom.
And for people who say, oh, well, it wasn't just the papacy, it was the Church of England. It was religious persecution in the name of God, right? Whether it was the Church of England or the Vatican, the energy, the spirit behind it was the dragon. And the Church of England was just as much in alignment with the papacy on forced religious thought. And that's essentially what we're dealing with here. When we deal with church-state unification, we also find forced religious principles. So let's start with the question, where does this concept of separation of church and state really come from? And we touched on it a little.
Famous at the COP28, this climate conference was kicked off by none other than King Charles III, the bloke who lives in a range of castles, palaces and farms with the carbon footprint of a coal-fired power station, but with none of the benefits. This is a bloke who speaks to his plants and runs one of his cars on wine or cheese or something, and he is out to lecture the world. I mean, he sure likes to talk up his own efforts.
I've spent a large proportion of my life trying to warn of the existential threats facing us over global warming.
Well, thank God he's been warning us, hey? And he doesn't mind scaring the kids either with a bit of catastrophism.
How dangerous are we actually prepared to make our world?
Scary stuff. He even likes to bring in a bit of religion.
I pray with all my heart that COP28 will be another critical turning point towards genuine transformational action at a time when already, as scientists have been warning for so long, we are seeing alarming tipping points being reached.
I suppose praying for the planet isn't a surprise given he heads up the Church of England, but then even the Pope sent a message. And he seemed less interested in religion and more focused on politics, wealth redistribution, and getting away from self-interest and nationalism.
Climate change signals the need for a political change. Let us emerge from the narrowness of self-interest and nationalism.
Long gone are the days that religious leaders stuck to religion. But then let's get back to King Charles III. And remembering his religious status, he was starting to sound like he now worships not God, but Gaia.
And we need to remember too that the indigenous worldview teaches us that we are all connected, not only as human beings, but with all living things and all that sustains life. As part of this grand and sacred system, harmony with nature must be maintained. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth.
We belong to the earth. This stuff is all getting a bit too much, isn't it? It is a new woke religion. It's not about science at all. But let me go back to what Charles said about tipping points.
We are seeing alarming tipping points being reached.
Really? Another tipping point? We're all going to die in boiling oceans again soon because of some tipping point. Doesn't this stuff sound kind of familiar?
Because time has quite literally run out. Alter our behaviour before we risk the tipping point of catastrophic climate change, beyond which there is no recovery. We have only 7 years before we lose the levers of control. Please, ladies and gentlemen, be in no doubt that unless greenhouse gas emissions reach their peak within about 100 months, just 100 months, it may well be too late to stop temperatures rising beyond dangerous levels. We are running out of time. How many times have I found myself saying this over recent years?
How many times? Well, yes. Well, may he ask that. He is still saying it 15 years later. At least 15 years since his first 100-month warning.
Pope Francis opened an important meeting of Catholic bishops today on the future of the Church.
Revered Pope Francis has recently revealed the evil Antichrist is amongst us, but many don't see it. His claim has been backed by the Holy Bible for centuries, predicting the arrival of the Antichrist in several verses and narrations. For decades, researchers have said the Antichrist is a powerful and famous political leader. Others imagine a cunning alien-like being. But what baffles everyone is why Pope Francis suddenly revealed this, and what the revelation means for Christians around the world. Let's dive into this profound mystery called the Antichrist.
Essentially the dark ages of papal persecution, the inability to think or choose for yourself. You were considered a heretic if you tried to read the Bible and understand it without the interpretation of a pope. We see that prior eras in this time frame were ruled by monarchs and kings that basically ruled and owned your life. In fact, America was maybe the only governmental system in the world that wasn't headed by a monarch at the time that it was founded. I can't think of any other ones. And you see this kind of pattern of this God-king mentality through all these world global systems, whether it was Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, Egyptians, they all had this God-king aspect to their society. And America is actually one of the very first ones that did not have this concept. Let's look at this article from Britannica.com. It says, the Christian concept of the secular and the spiritual is founded on the words of Jesus. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, render to God the things that are God. Two distinct but altogether separate areas of human life and activity had to be distinguished. Hence, a theory of two powers came to form the basis of Christian thought and teaching from the earliest times. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think right there that if we're talking about becoming a Christian nation, then we have to keep church and state separate. But unfortunately, people think to be a Christian nation, or that we should be supporting Christian values, that we have to now enforce things that Jesus directly spoke against. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's and to God what's God's.
By his in-depth knowledge about the Antichrist, he has just revealed the Antichrist has arrived and is silently lurking, waiting for the right time to expose itself. While Pope Francis has spoken countless times about the importance of discernment and the battle between good and the Antichrist's evil, his teachings often emphasize issues like social justice, care for the environment, and mercy. He has also linked the concept of the 10 kings in biblical prophecy with his revelation about the end times and the Antichrist. Besides Pope Francis, several theories also talk about the Antichrist. These include the rich billionaire theory, the religious leader theory, the political leader theory, and the apostate church leader theory. The rich billionaire Antichrist theory is a speculative interpretation of biblical prophecies that suggests the Antichrist will emerge as a wealthy billionaire, wielding vast economic and political influence. Some proponents of this theory draw connections between certain biblical verses and characteristics commonly associated with the lifestyles of affluent individuals. One key aspect often referenced is the idea that the Antichrist will be a charismatic and influential figure capable of uniting people under a charismatic guise. This aligns with the notion that a wealthy and powerful individual could sway public opinion and amass a following. It's essential to approach these interpretations cautiously, as biblical prophecy is inherently open to diverse interpretations, and the notion of a wealthy Antichrist is just one among many. A verse often cited in discussions about the Antichrist is found in the book of Revelation, specifically Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18, where it says that the wealthy billionaire will force everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and enslaved person, to receive a mark on his right hand or his forehead, so that no one could do anything unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. The Bible mentions that this calls for wisdom, so if anyone has insight, he needs to remember the number of the beast, which is 666. Interpreters of this verse may emphasize the economic control aspect of this passage, linking it to the potential influence a wealthy figure could exert over global commerce and trade. When examining the rich billionaire Antichrist theory, some proponents point to various biblical passages that, when interpreted in a specific way, align with the characteristics of a wealthy and influential individual taking on the role of the Antichrist. In addition to Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18, citing this theory, other verses about the Antichrist focus on the idea that the Antichrist will seek to change established norms and laws, potentially using their wealth and influence to reshape societal structures. Many scholars and religious authorities caution against overly specific identifications of the Antichrist and emphasize apocalyptic literature's symbolic and metaphorical nature. The second Antichrist theory is the concept of the Antichrist as a religious leader. It is a fascinating and complex aspect of eschatology that has led many to distrust religious leaders. Biblical verses and interpretations contribute to the theory of a spiritual leader embodying the Antichrist. In 2 Thessalonians verses 3 to 4, the Apostle Paul, in his second letter to the Thessalonians, discusses the coming of the man of lawlessness, or the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship. This passage has been interpreted by some as referring to the Antichrist, suggesting a religious leader with sinful tendencies. The Apostle John warns again in 1 John chapter 2 verses 18 to 22 about the coming of antichrists and describes them as those who deny Jesus as Christ. While these verses may not explicitly point to a single figure, they contribute to the broader understanding of antichrists in the plural, fostering the idea that the Antichrist could be a charismatic figure leading people away from traditional Christian beliefs. In Jesus Christ's discourse on the end times in Matthew 24, he warns of false prophets who will perform great signs and wonders, deceiving, if possible, even the elect. This can be interpreted as a cautionary note about charismatic leaders who might mislead people, laying the groundwork for the concept of an antichrist who deceives through religious charisma. The idea of a spiritual leader as the Antichrist is often intertwined with broader discussions about the nature of the end times, the second coming of Christ,
thank you for this wonderful introduction. And yes, what I want to talk to you about is AI and the future of humanity. Now, I know that these conferences focus on the ecological crisis facing humanity, but for better or for worse, AI too is part of this crisis. AI can help us in many ways to overcome the ecological crisis, or it can make it far, far worse. Actually, AI will probably change the very meaning of the ecological system. Because for 4 billion years, the ecological system of planet Earth contained only organic life forms. And now, or soon, we might see the emergence of the first inorganic life forms after 4 billion years, or at the very least, the emergence of inorganic agents. Now, people have feared AI since the very beginning of the computer age, in the middle of the 20th century. And this fear has inspired many science fiction classics, like The Terminator or The Matrix. Now, while such science fiction scenarios have become cultural landmarks, they haven't usually been taken seriously in academic and scientific and political debates, and perhaps for a good reason. Because science fiction scenarios usually assume that before AI can pose a significant threat to humanity, it will have to reach or to pass two important milestones. First, AI will have to become sentient and develop consciousness, feelings, emotions. Otherwise, why would it even want to take over the world? Secondly, AI will have to become adept at navigating the physical world. Robots will have to be able to move around and operate in houses and cities and mountains and forests, at least as dexterously and efficiently as humans. If they cannot move around the physical world, how can they possibly take it over?
And nobody had enough computing power and data to hack millions of people. Neither the Gestapo nor the KGB could do it. But soon, at least some corporations and governments will be able to systematically hack all the people. We humans should get used to the idea that we are no longer mysterious souls. We are now hackable animals. Data might enable human elites to do something even more radical than just build digital dictatorships. By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it. And if indeed we succeed in hacking and engineering life, this will be not just the greatest revolution in the history of humanity. This will be the greatest revolution in biology since the very beginning of life 4 billion years ago. For 4 billion years, nothing fundamental changed in the basic rules of the game of life. All of life, for 4 billion years, dinosaurs, amoebas, tomatoes, humans, all of life was subject to the laws of natural selection and to the laws of organic biochemistry. But this is now about to change. Science is replacing evolution by natural selection with evolution by intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds, but our intelligent design and the intelligent design of our clouds. The IBM cloud, the Microsoft cloud, these are the new driving forces of evolution. And at the same time, science may enable life, after being confined for 4 billion years to the limited realm of organic compounds, science may enable life to break out into the inorganic realm. So after 4 billion years of organic life shaped by natural selection, we are entering the era of inorganic life shaped by intelligent design. So does the data about my DNA, my brain, my body, my life, does it belong to me or to some corporation or to the government or perhaps to the human collective? Humans are now hackable animals. You know, the whole idea that humans have, you know, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. Free will, that's over.
That's over.
Over. Today, we have the technology to hack human beings on a massive scale. Yeah, I mean, everything is being digitalized. Everything is being monitored. In this time of crisis, you have to follow science. It's often said that you should never allow a good crisis to go to waste, because a crisis is an opportunity to also do good reforms that in normal times people will never agree to. But in a crisis, you see, we have no chance. So let's do it.
Vaccine won't help us go
to
the test, of course.
The vaccine will help us, of course. It will make things, you know, more manageable. Surveillance. People could look back in 100 years and identify the coronavirus epidemic as the moment when a new regime of surveillance took over, especially surveillance under the skin, which I think is maybe the most important development of the 21st century, is this ability to hack human beings, to go under the skin, collect biometric data, analyze it, and understand people better than they understand themselves. This, I believe, is maybe the most important event of the 21st century.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us. The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing, it changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed. Yeah, and of course this has a big impact on your identity.
Yeah. And offers certain kinds of possibilities that have to be careful about. You know, when you began to do that kind of gene editing, some people worry that you are changing what it means to be human.
That's the problem. And of course, the new industrial revolution offers us many.
The Apostle Paul, in his second letter to the Thessalonians, discusses the coming of the man of lawlessness, or the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship. This passage has been interpreted by some as referring to the Antichrist, suggesting a religious leader with sinful tendencies. The Apostle John warns again in 1 John chapter 2, verses 18 to 22 about the coming of antichrists and describes them as those who deny Jesus as Christ. While these verses may not explicitly point to a single figure, they contribute to the broader understanding of antichrists in the plural, fostering the idea that the Antichrist could be a charismatic figure leading people away from traditional Christian beliefs. In Jesus Christ's discourse on the end times in Matthew 24, he warns of false prophets who will perform great signs and wonders, deceiving, if possible, even the elect. This can be interpreted as a cautionary note about charismatic leaders who might mislead people, laying the groundwork for the concept of an antichrist who deceives through religious charisma. The idea of a spiritual leader as the antichrist is often intertwined with broader discussions about the nature of the end times, the second coming of Christ, and the fulfillment of biblical prophecies. Scholars and theologians throughout history have offered diverse perspectives on these passages, contributing to the rich tapestry of eschatological thought within Christianity. The third theory, that the Antichrist could manifest as a political leader, is another intriguing facet of eschatological interpretations within modern Christianity. Given the religious undertones of the Antichrist narrative, there's an exploration of the idea that a political leader may engage in interfaith diplomacy, presenting a facade of unity while subtly undermining core religious beliefs. This aligns with biblical warnings about false prophets and deceivers. Throughout history, after the biblical period, various figures have been identified as potential antichrists, often tied to political power. For instance, some viewed Pope Innocent III as an antichrist figure during the medieval period due to his political influence. Similarly, figures like Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler have been proposed as modern analogies to the Antichrist, given their significant political impact and the upheaval they caused. Apart from the Book of Revelations, the Book of Daniel is known for discussing the Antichrist. What does it say about the figure and its arrival? While Antichrist is not explicitly used in the Book of Daniel, Chapter 8 presents a vision of a goat representing an influential political leader who becomes exceedingly great. This leader is fierce, making dark comments and causing mighty destruction. Some interpreters connect these verses to the Antichrist, suggesting a political leader who rises to prominence with cunning and destructive power. The Book of Daniel in the Old Testament also presents visions of beasts and rulers. Chapter 7, verses 8, 20, and 25 mention a boastful horn speaking great things and making war against the saints. Some connect this imagery to the Antichrist, proposing a parallel with a charismatic religious leader who rises to power and persecutes believers, exalts himself above every god, speaking astonishing things against the God of gods. This leader shows no regard for the desire of women, which has been debated among scholars, but is often seen as a characteristic of the Antichrist. The focus on political and military power in these verses aligns with the concept of a political leader as the Antichrist. The Apostle Paul.
In Greek mythology, Pan is a deity associated with nature, is a half-human, half-goat. He is usually depicted with the legs of a goat, horns and carrying a panpipe. Pan is considered to be one of the oldest of Greek gods. He is associated with nature, wooded areas and pasturelands, from which his name is derived. Pan ruled over shepherds, hunters and rustic music. He was the patron god of Arcadia. He was often in the company of the wood nymphs, and other deities of the forest. Pan parentage is a bit ambiguous, but according to most sources, he was the son of Hermes and a dryad, or Penelope of Mantinea. Pan was born a mature child in Arcadia. His distinct appearance, half-goat, half-man, delighted the hearts of all gods, which is why they named him Pan. The god spent most of his days wandering the forests, playing haunting melodies on his pipes, chasing nymphs. For most of the time, he loved naps, even more than he loved his nymphs, which explains why the ancient Greeks believed it was fairly dangerous to disturb them. Like Olympian gods, Pan possessed enormous strength. He could also run for long periods of time, and impenetrable to injury. He could transform objects into different forms, and was able to teleport himself from Earth to Mount Olympus, and back. Pan was the inventor of a musical instrument called the panpipes or syrinx, which he learned to play so well that, he even ended up challenging Apollo himself to a musical contest. Unsurprisingly, he lost. The mythological stories involving Pan usually involve his romantic interest in a lovely goddess, who gets turned into an inanimate object, to escape him from his ugly appearance. One story concerns Syrinx. A beautiful nymph was a follower of Artemis, which means that she valued her chastity above all things in life. One
agreed upon at the UN General Assembly will act with urgency to realize its vision as a plan of action for people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership, leaving no one behind. We emphasize that eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty. So they want to do away with all poverty. We're all the same. So this is what Donald Trump says. This is global communism. So Donald Trump knows this agenda. This is why he got the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He knows this is global communism. But with Joe Biden back as president, now we're back in this. So it will leave no one left behind, literally.
Right. And then we found out that when we did the other interview that Build Back Better, which Joe Biden said, which others said too, because he wasn't the originator of Build Back Better, but Build Back Better was like the 15-minute cities where you build back better and you're living in your house and you're allowed to go beyond, 15 minutes, but not beyond that. That was what Build Back Better was. So anyway.
Yep. Then they state, we reaffirm the 2030 agenda is universal. And then it calls it the Millennium Declaration. So this is a plan for 1,000 years. We also reaffirm that climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our time. So they believe that man can control the weather. We commit to bold and ambitious, accelerated, just, transformative actions anchored in international solidarity and effective cooperation at all levels. So this goes from your top government officials all the way down to your local mayor, the people that work in your city and your school districts, and down to your teachers. And it says we will devote ourselves collectively to pursuit of sustainable development, including through international cooperation. So anytime they say that there's international cooperation or they're strengthening the goals, this is how they're confirming the covenant with everyone.
Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
And it's to strengthen resilience, including through Millennium Declaration. So this is a plan for 1,000 years. We also reaffirm that climate change is one of the greatest challenges of our time. So they believe that man can control the weather. We commit to bold and ambitious, accelerated, just, transformative actions anchored in international solidarity and effective cooperation at all levels. So this goes from your top government officials all the way down to your local mayor, the people that work in your city and your school districts, and down to your teachers. And it says we will devote ourselves collectively to pursuit of sustainable development, including through international cooperation. So anytime they say that there's international cooperation or they're strengthening the goals, this is how they're confirming the covenant with everyone.
Makes sense. Mm-hmm.
And it's to strengthen resilience, including through pandemic prevention. So there'll be another one, preparedness and response. And so they're planning for another event. We remain resolved between now and 2030, that's 7 years, to end poverty and hunger everywhere, to combat inequalities with and among countries, to build peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. We commit to achieving a world in which humanity lives in harmony with nature. King Charles wrote a book on harmony and his plan to bring about harmony several years ago, and that we're seeing that played out. So I would say that compares to what happened in World War II. With the book that Adolf Hitler wrote. But nobody would read it. But if you read Harmony, you can see the whole plan, that there is no God and that King Charles must replace that image of God. And so we see that with the Terra Carta. The Terra Carta has his crown over all the world. So it declares in heraldry, it says, I'm king of the world. And then with the Astra Carta, which is the second seal of King Charles, that declares him king of the whole universe. You can show those symbols and you'll see the head, it's right in the heading, especially Astra Carta. It tells you right in the heading exactly that he is to care for the wonders of the universe. Unbelievable.
Right. It's Bible prophecy coming to pass.
Being ruled by God here, we are, it's not a theocracy. So we need to make sure we keep things separate because man is faulty and we will start enforcing things and it'll go back to things that we don't want and dictating to other people's conscience.
And what we're not saying is, we're not saying disobey the government. God has placed powers and rulers and kings. He has allowed kingdoms to stand. And in fact, we are subject to those rulers as long as those laws that are put into effect are not in contrast or breaking the law of God. And that's ultimately where the line in the sand becomes. Because I think it's easy for a lot of people to see stuff like this and say, oh, well, they're obviously promoting for some kind of revolution, shake up the government, get the guys out of power, but we're not. I think both you and I, Mackenzie, fully understand that there's nothing we're going to do here to change the power structure before Jesus comes to make this place any better. In fact, we know it's just going to get worse.
Jesus said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, not don't give to Caesar what is Caesar's. So we need to have that respect, that honor, and everything for the systems that are in play, as long as, like you said, they don't go against God's law. So, should we obey the speed limit? Yes. Should we not do things that break the law? Yes, 100%. We're not advising tyranny or rebellion or anything like that. We are just talking about rights and the rights that people have and that they should have and that they should still have. But unfortunately, the powers at play don't want you to have those rights, which is why we're talking about it, because you need to be aware about the changes that are happening.
That's right. And we want you to be able to make the right decision when it comes. And we want you to be able to do that with the right spirit that Christ.
Peace and security. So they have to have a declaration at this event for peace and security within the seventh destruction. The 2030 agenda remains our commitment to children and youth of today. So their focus is on your children, that they may achieve their full human potential. That's your children as digitized, and that's their goal within the next couple of years.
Ooh, okay.
And
how would they digitize the children? I mean, is that connected with Neuralink?
Probably Neuralink. They're saying what is on your phone today will eventually be in your body. I just read that this morning on their agenda. It's like, I can't believe this. So what you're doing with your iPhone today or your Samsung phone, they'll eventually be inside your body. And this is what they want to implement within 4 years.
Right. Now, are they going to be pushing for children first, or just everyone at the same time?
It appears to be everyone at the same time.
Okay.
But it's the children that are going to love that. It's like a toy. So us adults are a little slow to learn technology. So
we're not being ruled by God here. We are. It's not a theocracy. So we need to make sure we keep things separate, because man is faulty, and we will start enforcing things, and it'll go back to things that we don't want and dictating to other people's conscience.
And what we're not saying is, we're not saying disobey the government. God has placed powers and rulers and kings. He has allowed kingdoms to stand. And in fact, we are subject to those rulers as long as those laws that are put into effect are not in contrast or breaking the law of God. And that's ultimately where the line in the sand becomes. Because I think it's easy for a lot of people to see stuff like this and say, oh, well, they're obviously promoting for some kind of revolution, shake up the government, get the guys out of power, but we're not. I think both you and I, Mackenzie, fully understand that there's nothing we're going to do here to change the power structure before Jesus comes to make this place any better. In fact, we know it's just going to get worse.
Jesus said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, not don't give to Caesar what is Caesar's. So we need to have that respect, that honor, and everything for the systems that are in play, as long as, like you said, they don't go against God's law. So should we obey the speed limit? Yes. Should we not do things that break the law? Yes, 100%. We're not advising tyranny or rebellion or anything like that. We are just talking about rights and the rights that people have and that they should have and that they should still have. But unfortunately, the powers at play don't want you to have those rights, which is why we're talking about it, because you need to be aware about the changes that are happening.
That's right. And we want you to be able to make the right decision when it comes. And we want you to be able to do that with the right spirit that Christ intended, because there's no point in making the right decision for the right reasons with the wrong spirit. Let's say you see the line coming and you want to attack or break down. I mean, you look at the Reformation, there were guys like Karlstadt ripping down statues off of cathedrals because it's idol worship, and that still carries on today. But we're certainly not advocating people go down and tear down statues. What we're advocating for is understand what's coming and who's behind it, so that way when it does happen, you're ready to help others. And you're ready to do it with praying for your enemies and loving those who persecute you. That will be a big difference between what we're advocating and this Christian power that's coming. The Christian power is going to say some of the same stuff we're saying here, except they're going to say that force is necessary, that violence is okay in the act. As we see, anybody who shall not worship shall be killed. That's a violent act. I don't see any scenario where Christ showed that same force. In fact, that's a hallmark trait of Satan, which we've talked about in the past. So let's continue on. It says in the understanding, where does this concept of church and state separation come from and why was it needed to begin with? It said during the 1st century AD, the apostles living under pagan Roman Empire taught respect for and obedience to the governing powers so long as such obedience did not violate the higher or divine law, which superseded political jurisdiction. Does this principle still exist today?
For sure.
Absolutely. Among the church fathers who lived in a church period when Christianity had become the religion of the empire, the emphasis of the primacy of the spiritual was even stronger. They insisted upon the independence of the church and the right of the church to judge the actions of the secular ruler. With the decline of the Roman Empire in the West, civil authority fell into the hands of the only educated class that remained, the churchmen. The church, which formed the only organized institution, became the seat of temporal power as well as spiritual power. The following centuries were marked by a dramatic struggle of emperors and kings with the popes. So it says in one line before, they unified them under one man, church and state, and immediately after a dramatic struggle. So we can see right off the bat, the church-state system has never been a positive.
Not for the people anyways.
No, and even for other emperors and popes. There's a story where I believe it was the king of Germany, or maybe it's the king of France, had to stand outside in the freezing cold of winter naked in a sign of humiliation so that he could go in before the pope and beg for assistance for his issue. So this same level of the pope sees themselves in those who uplift this Catholic system, see the Pope as above all gods, kings, presidents, prime ministers on earth because of his spiritual authority claimed to be given to him by God. So it says the concept of secular government as expressed in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution reflected both the influence of the French Enlightenment on colonial intellectuals and the special interest of the established churches in preserving their separate and distinct identities. The Baptists, notably, held the separation of church and state powers as a principle of their creed. So the Baptists, this is not a Seventh-day Adventist doctrine, Baptists understood the need for this separation. In fact, we're going to go look at another quote from a Methodist here in a minute. It says, the great wave of migration to the United States by Roman Catholics in the 1840s prompted a reassertion of the principle of secular government by state legislatures, fearing the allocation of government funds to parochial educational facilities. So we see here pretty clearly that the concept of separation of church and state, and this is from Britannica, this is a neutral information source, that it stems directly from the popes getting too much power, and then even acknowledges that in the 1840s, as Roman Catholics were migrating to the United States, that migration effort actually further solidified the need for this separation of church and state, because the people at that time still fully remembered the history of the church and what was behind it.
And if you remember in previous podcast, we talked that the papacy is actually a kingdom, and that the people that are Catholic are actually part of their kingdom. And so when you have immigration of Catholics or people that are accepting Catholicism, you're actually having people of a totally different regime in your government, which is why they had to keep religion and state completely separate, or else there'd start to be blurred lines, and then your kingdom now becomes Catholic state or papal.
For people who want to see more on that and kind of looking at what JFK and the difference between JFK and Biden, both the two Roman Catholic presidents in history, you should go check out the latest prophecy report. I think it was back in July, where it talks about Biden and the Supreme Court having that exact issue, that they're basically representatives for a foreign king. It'd be like having operatives of China or Russia sitting in the president and Supreme Court seats. So people are interested in that, go check that out. And I'd like to add, if this type of material interests you and you think it's important to understand, like, subscribe, and share this information now. It really does help our channel. It helps reach new audiences. And I think for people who are really impacted and really on fire to share this information, there's no bigger way to help us than to hit like, subscribe, share, and comment down below. So I'd like to go back, Mackenzie, to another Protestant that understood this issue with kind of defining Christianity either between a Protestant version of it or a Catholic version of it, and why it's so important when understanding church and state of the past and the coming church and state in the future.
And this one's a very interesting reference. This is actually from a Methodist bishop named Earl Cranston. This was back in 1916, and even a little bit earlier he was talking about this. And this is someone else talking about the importance of the separation of church and state. And this is the quote: "Suppose this were to be declared a Christian nation by constitutional interpretation to that effect. What would that mean?" It's a very good question, because we're talking about it so much in politics right now, but what does that actually mean? Well, he tells us what it means. Which of the two contending definitions of Christianity would the word Christian indicate? The Protestant idea? Of course, for under our system, majorities rule. And the majority of Americans are Protestants. Very well. But suppose that by the addition of a certain contiguous territory with 12 or more millions of Roman Catholics, the annexion of a few more islands with half as many more, and the same rate of immigration as now, the majority some years hence should be Roman Catholics. So he's saying, okay, it's fine right now because everybody's Protestant and everybody wants Protestant values. That's why we left Europe. But he's saying, the amount of immigration of Catholics that's coming to America, the majority will be Catholic. So if we're going on majority, who defines what the rules of Christianity are, it's eventually going to be Catholic. Now he goes on. Who doubts for a moment that the reigning pope would assume control of legislation and government? So right now, for some reason, we have a tough time believing that if the Pope got access to legislation and the government, that he wouldn't enforce these laws. We think, no, that's the Dark Ages. But we're seeing here that in this time, they're saying there is no even doubt. No one would even question that the Pope would do this. He would say with all confidence and consistency, this is a Christian nation. It was so claimed from the beginning and so declared many years ago. A majority defined then what Christianity was. The majority will define now what Christianity now is and is to be. That majority would be the Pope. So there's talking exactly what we've been saying here, that we have to be careful because we may have good intentions, but that doesn't mean that what we do because we have good intentions is the right thing.
And I would say that while this quote does shed light on the conditions that they understood at the time, he ends up being not totally correct in having Catholics become majority. But you actually don't need Catholics to become majority, right? You just need them to become statistically significant enough to where you can place them strategically in high positions of power in government. And that's what we're seeing. When you look at the majority of Catholics in high positions of power at this day and age, it outweighs the Protestant influence significantly. In fact, right now I would say it would go Catholic, Jewish, then Protestant as the 1, 2, and 3 of influences on the judicial and legislative makeup of the United States. So while he's saying here that what definition of Christianity would we use? Well, Catholics, the papacy specifically, and the popes have worked really, really hard to get through their education system, the Jesuit education system, to get young minds trained in Catholic upbringing, regardless of background. I have family that went through Jesuit schooling, even though they call themselves Protestants. And what happens on the other end of that is that the young people are none the wiser to what's happening to their mindsets and their worldviews. But then they come out of it fully ready to support Catholic social teaching and Catholic doctrine, whether they fully realize it or not. And that's exactly what we're seeing today, which is the legislative aspects of the government are now heavily Roman Catholic and ruling in favor of those Catholic positions.
And then, like you said, we don't need technically a majority anymore, especially because everybody has this ecumenical mindset. So we're all the same, we're all Christian, it's all good, there's not really a big difference. And nobody's studying their Bibles anymore. Nobody's understanding what Protestantism means. So a Catholic is a Lutheran, is an Adventist, is a Baptist, is everything else. Because we're one big Christian happy family. And unfortunately, the people who are the most in the power play positions are the Catholics. And we're basically setting it up for that to happen. Because the Protestants just say, oh, we need God back in the country. And that's basically it. But Catholics are very strategic. They are very principled. They have their traditions and they follow their traditions biblically or rigidly, I should say. But the Protestants aren't like that. So we have this ecumenical mindset, and the word Catholic means universal. The Roman Catholic Church, it means the universal church. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. And that's what they've done very successfully so far.
And people will say, well, so we should expect the Catholic influence to continue. But actually, it will be Protestants that eventually take over the government. But what's left of Protestantism at that point, it'll just be Roman Catholic doctrine dressed up as Protestantism.
They've accepted the entire doctrine.
That's right. So we may even actually see a shift of people saying, oh, let's move away from these Catholic Supreme Court judges and away from a Catholic president. But right behind them will be Protestants that, kind of like Neil Gorsuch, who calls himself an Episcopalian, but studied and grew up a Catholic, studied Catholic social doctrine. And when you look at that church's makeup, it's very Catholic in its belief system. So, but it calls itself Protestant. And I think you hit on a good point earlier, Mackenzie, where you said, what are they protesting against? Nobody's protesting anymore. Nobody understands where the term Protestant came from and why you needed to protest to begin with, to the point where you have Protestants saying, let's unite church and state. So let's go back in history and see what was the result of this old church-state system. And I think we're going to see that it paints a picture that's pretty grim, but also very telling about what's going to come in our future. So let's read this excerpt from history.com, another secular, neutral source. It says, after the fall of Rome, no single state or government united the people who lived on the European continent. Instead, the Catholic Church became the most powerful institution of the medieval period. That's not surprising. Most people should know the Inquisitions and the Crusades and a lot of these religious-based, very bloody, the Reformation, very bloody persecuting periods have been defined as the time period where the Catholic Church held this most power. And it's like Revelation 13 says, this period of the first beast before it received its deadly wound, or in other words, had its power taken away. So it says, kings, queens, and other leaders derived much of their power from their alliances with and protection of the church. That's very interesting, because one of those powers is the Crown of England. The Crown of England is on loan, essentially, power and resources from the Vatican, where this era represented that same kind of time period. I believe it was in the 16th or 15th century that the papacy allows the ruling family of England to hold their title and hold their crown. But they only do so, they only derived their power from their alliance with and protection of the church.
And that's exactly what it's going towards. This whole New World Order, most people who are talking about this don't actually know the punchline. They don't know that the whole one world order is going to be the one Catholic system. It is going to be this, and then in the end, it'll be the worship of Satan and his system and his rulership.
And I'll say the kings, queens, and other leaders of the medieval times are now today presidents, prime ministers, finance ministers, and other political people, and I could bet you could say the exact same thing. Those leaders have derived much of their power from their alliances with and protections of the church. It's why most of them are Roman Catholic. The principle is the same. They may not be kings and queens anymore, but they're rulers of the people.
And in our first couple podcasts, we showed how a lot of these people are Luciferian. So the fact that they would enforce things that is to the worship of Lucifer should not be surprising to us. But go ahead, continue.
So let's continue to look at this old church-state system. It's become pretty clear that secular sources say that most of the powers of the medieval time had to have some sort of alliance with the church. Otherwise, they were outright persecuted by the church. In 800 CE, for example, or I'll say AD, in 800 AD, Pope Leo III named the Frankish king Charlemagne emperors of the Romans, the first since that empire's fall more than 300 years before. Over time, Charlemagne's realm became the Holy Roman Empire, one of 7 political entities in Europe whose interests tended to align with those of the church. Ordinary people across Europe had to tithe, that's giving money, 10% of their earnings each year to the church. At the same time, the church was mostly exempt from taxation. These policies helped it to amass a great deal of power and money. So here, as the church and state system is forming, the persecution of the people increases. They have less rights, but they also have to give to the church, which is exempt from taxation itself. So it's essentially fueling the rise of this persecuting power. And if you didn't go along with it, well, you better give 10% at the time. You better give your 10% because there's nothing stopping them from literally pulling you out of your home, putting you on a stake, and lighting you on fire.
This order of Freemasonry, and that's the Order of the Garter.
The highest order? So what is the highest order of Freemasonry?
So the highest order has 24 knights, and we know from Scripture and Revelation that Jesus Christ has 24 elders. So we see that same symbolism, and it's like, oh my goodness sake, there's a similarity there. So it's 24 knights that are given their knighthood by the king, or formerly the queen, that are in this highest order.
So, in other words, he kind of rules over 24 elders of Masonry?
He rules over 24 elders, and they want to rule over the whole earth.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I was like, when I saw that, it's like, there's 24 in there. It's like, why didn't I see that before? And go back to Revelation. It's like, so then I did a whole study on Revelation, the 24 elders, and I called my sister. It's like, who are these 24 elders? And she goes, oh, I got a perfect video for that. She sends it to me, and the 24 elders in Revelation actually tell the gospel story for mankind. And it's like within their names. And it's like, oh my goodness, I really learned something. So I don't know what the names of King Charles Knights would symbolize, but it might be something for somebody to dig up.
That's really quite something. So in Freemasonry, he is the ruler of the 24 knights, and he's the highest guy in Freemasonry. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. So I knew from 1992, I knew that whoever held that seat, at that time I didn't know who it'd be, but from 1992, whoever held that seat in the Order of the Garter would be the future Antichrist. Just based on me working at a Masonic temple, I figured that out. I worked as a dishwasher, so nobody can.
Oh yeah, I remember you saying that on the video. Yeah. So so say that one more time. You were working at a thing.
I was working at. It's called the Inn of Nichols Village in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So we went to Wilkes-Barre. I believe it was in Wilkes-Barre or Scranton. It's Scranton. It was in the Scranton Masonic Temple, and we do parties there. But during my break, I'd go wander, go on what I call a walkabout. I'd go explore the Masonic Temple, and then there was a door that was unlocked, and so I opened the door and then looked down on their temple room, and it's like, oh, this reminds me of what I learned in Sunday school about Solomon's temple, how they had it decorated, and then I did a little bit of research on the Masons and say, hey, this is where the Antichrist is going to come from. It's from Freemasonry.
Wow.
And so I didn't know, at that time I didn't know who it was, and the Queen was the head of the Order of the Garter at that time.
And doesn't he have some sort of connection to the Anglican Church or something like that, or am I?
You would connect to Mormonism and the city of, I believe, if I'm pronouncing it right, Eliat, Israel. So if you go to the center of town, you have this all these symbols of Freemasonry within Israel. It's very, very strong in Eliat. I believe it's called Eliat. So somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but EL something.
Okay, so just to do a little review on what we just said on this King Charles stuff, he is shaking hands with Islam. He has a mosque in his backyard, which is his preferred religion. He had a picture with a sword and all that jazz. Some of the Muslims, I think you believe, said that they think that King Charles is their Mahdi. Is that right?
Well, he resembles yes. There are some that believe that he's their savior.
Something that he is their savior. He's got these seals that says he is the defender of the universe, and also another seal that says he's, I don't know what the other one said, but something about ruling the world.
Harmony, people, and planet.
Harmony, people, and planet. He's got these cards that were designed 25 years ago that says he's untouchable and there's fire from heaven. These cards also talk about the rapture. These Illuminati cards that we brought up earlier on. He's the main speaker in the 7-year World Covenant, which is basically in the works right now. He is the leader of the Freemasons, and he's got.
We have 12 days. We have 12 days to go from now till the confirming of the covenant. While we're doing this video. So no matter what, whether this is the covenant or not, we have no matter what, we have a 7-year deal that starts on December 12th. I mean, that is 100% going to happen. Whether this is the Daniel 9:27 covenant, we'll know when the first trumpet sounds, or when we get some declaration that this is going to take place in the next couple of days.
And like I said before at the beginning of the video, there's nothing really that's really super exciting in terms of a 7-year plan next year or in 2025 that you can really look towards, because the COP thing, it rotates every 7 years. So the next one would be 2030 to 2037. Is that right?
That's right. 100% has to go that way. I actually have the Paris Climate Agreement, so I read that portion, and so it's the mechanism. The mechanism to bring about a 7-year covenant is referred to as global stocktake. It's right in their documents.
And there's nothing else that you can see in the United Nations that seems to indicate a 7-year plan from like 24 to 2031.
No, there's no Agenda 2031. There's no Agenda 2033. I mean, they obviously consider that they have to kick the can down the road, but they said the can stops now. We have to make a deal now. So they're stating this is the moment. Now, whether they agree by the 10th or 11th of December, that remains to be seen. But they have to do a global deal by December 12th.
I remember you also talking about the coat of arms, or I think it's called the coat of arms, and with the white horse on it and things of that nature.
Yes, that's his calling card. So you have seven heads upon the coat of arms. You have 7 crowns on each head. You have the head of a lion, body as a leopard, feet as oversized as a bear to the left. On top, you have the little dog or the little lion that oversees and the what do you call it? I'll just call it the whelp. So he's the one in control at the very top of the symbols. In the middle, you have the shield, and you have the one king that rises up as the 11th and strikes down 3 right there in the middle of the crest. So he's going to have the power over 3 nations, whereas 7 other kings are on their own. You have the white horse that has the open mouth, just like Daniel states that he speaks all these pompous words. So he has the open mouth, the eyes of a man. So it's not a normal feature of a horse to have eyes of a man. But what's really interesting, I don't remember the meaning behind it, but it's really interesting. The feet of the horse are that of a goat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's very, very interesting. And then that white horse, the rider of that white horse is tied to the red dragon, and underneath Gideon, but with the heraldry, it reads, "I, the Black Prince, serve the red dragon."
Wow, you got a little glitchy there, but I think you're okay now. But so So that it's called it's called the coat of arms, right?
Yeah, it's called the coat of arms.
And so and so what you're saying is this is a symbol of Revelation 13 as well as it was Daniel 7, I believe.
It's also I believe it's Daniel 7, and so Daniel 7 has Revelation 13 describes the left side, basically the left side of the image, and as far as a white horse, he comes as a white horse. Mm-hmm. Revelation 6:2, and then Daniel describes him as a little horn, which is reveals his power, and then with eyes of a man and his open mouth, and such in Daniel. So between Daniel's prophecy and John and the prophecies written by John, you have the complete coat of arms of Prince Charles of Wales, and he maintains that symbol as king as well. So he has to fulfill everything that's in that coat of arms.
Wow. You'd assume he would use some sort of a king, quote unquote, to be the Antichrist, in terms of the biblical narrative. The
Revelation 6:2 says he is given a bow, which we see the rainbow given to him in January 2020. Right. And he was also given a crown. So this is past tense before the seals are open. He's given a crown, and the only king in the world that has a coronation service to this day is King Charles.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other king on the planet that's had a coronation. So they call themselves kings, but there's no ceremony to officially crown them. And then to claim that he's king of Israel, along with that, it's like unbelievable.
Wow. Oh yeah, somebody said that show them the statue. Well, maybe you can talk about the statue of the King Charles statue. I think they were referring to. I just saw that.
There is a statue with him with wings, and underneath you have these people at his feet that are begging for him to be their savior, and that's supposed to be erected in, I believe, Brazil. So.
Does anybody else have a statue of themselves stepping on people, demanding worship? With wings on a statue?
That's a good way to put it.
I don't have a statue in my backyard of me stepping on people with wings. I also don't have a mosque in my backyard. I also don't have trillions at my disposal. I also don't rule over 24 nights of whatever masonry.
And he rules over a quarter of the earth in the Commonwealth. Yeah. So the Commonwealth makes up over 1/4 of the earth of the planet's countries.
And then we see how they built these amazing cathedrals that today would cost millions, if not billions of dollars to make all these amazing structures.
That's absolutely true. They're the richest organization on earth, and a lot of it is because of the real estate they hold and the quality of the real estate, what it's composed of. Fine metals, fine stone materials, some of the highest master craftsmanship on the planet. So let's continue to look at this Deseret article. There's another article here that kind of gives us an idea of what this time period was like in this old church-state system. The majority of the medieval people were thus unable to read the Bible for a number of reasons. First, they generally didn't know how to read at all. And that was in part because the papacy was not interested in having people read for themselves, read and write for themselves. Even if they had a basic literacy, though most didn't know Latin, finally, even if they could read Latin, the cost of the Bible at the equivalent of today would be $10,000 to $20,000 to buy a Bible.
A little bit prohibitive.
That was very prohibitive, except to the very rich. So the enlightened ones, the illuminated ones, we see on the back of the dollar, the pyramid with the capstone separated, that's illuminated. This would be the very rich of the time who would have access. I mean, it was like a status symbol if you had a Bible, and a status symbol even more if you could read it for yourself. You were really up there if you did that. How then, the article continues, how then did average medieval Christians encounter the Bible? They heard it read to them, generally by a priest or monk.
And then that would obviously be interpreted through the lens of the monk or the priest, who openly say that tradition is higher than the Bible. So now we have a conflict even the hearing of the Bible.
And imagine now these priests and monks, who's their first loyalty to? Who are they bound by? That's the Pope.
Pope.
Right? And so if they're bound by a Pope who they see as God King over the scriptures themselves, if need be, how would that influence their interpretation of the scriptures in giving it to the people of the time? It would obviously skew it heavily towards the Pope being the God King worthy of worship. So the article continues. The most important part of late medieval Catholic meetings was the Mass, or Eucharist, or what members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints call sacrament. So this idea that you have to participate in the Mass, at the centerpiece of the Mass is the Eucharist. We could do a whole episode, and maybe we should at some point, on why the Eucharist is an abomination. But let's continue. The second most important element, however, was the Lectio, the reading or lecture. This entailed an oral reading of the Latin Bible to the church audience. And they'll do this sometimes still today. They'll just read the Bible in Latin in Mass, and people will just sit there not knowing what they're saying at all. Like, how is that edifying to the people, being written in a language that's no longer around, and most people don't understand, even back then, especially they didn't understand. Thus, in a very real sense, illiterate people went to church to hear the Bible read to them. Additionally, Bible precepts and stories were often paraphrased and retold in all sorts of circumstances, formal and informal. So I think what we're getting from this is that the papacy, once set up as a church-state system, placed itself between the person and the Bible, which, let's just rephrase that. They stood that between the person and Jesus Christ, because really the Bible is just a revelation of Jesus Christ in his totality, right?
They became the middleman, or what they use the phrase, the mediator. Now they have
That's
many
right.
mediators.
And in this mediation process, they make you do things like confession. They make you do things like the Mass and the Eucharist. They make you pay indulgences for future sins, deal with doctrines on purgatory and hell, all standing between Christ and the individual, which is obviously Christ is the mediator and intercessor between God and man, between the Father and mankind. And here, the papacies come even before Christ and saying, hey, confess to me, when Jesus says, he's the only one that can forgive sins. Come to me. And so what we're seeing is this system not only suppresses individual liberties and even thought, but it actually seeks to stand between you and salvation. And today you will find that still the common practice in the confession to priests who are fallible men who don't have the power to absolve you of your sins, but also through the adoration of saints. I've had people during the last couple years tell me they're praying to all sorts of different saints to help them through the struggle of the pandemic and other things that came up through that time. And I always wondered to myself, why don't you just go straight to Jesus? Why don't you ask Jesus for help? Why do you want to go to saints who are only saints in a lot of senses through the deification or beatification of the Pope? Canonizing them or bringing them into the sainthood through his declaration, which again, I don't think God intended any man to be able to declare someone a saint or not, because we can't discern the heart, the mind, the thoughts, and all of those aspects. So I think it's pretty safe to say the church-state system of old was a suppressive system that kept you from receiving salvation in Christ alone, through the Word alone.
Directly against how Jesus said that we should be praying. He said we should pray, Our Father, which art in heaven. And if you look at a lot of the new Bible versions too, which are created in the same way by Luciferians, but that's a whole nother topic, they take out which art in heaven. Jesus also says, don't call any man other than your real father, father on earth. And that is exactly what the Catholic Church does. You call all the priests father, and you can pray to them, you can pray to the saints, you can pray to all these different people, but the Bible says, Our Father, which art in heaven. And Well, that's a pretty defining if it's the Father in heaven, because that obviously means it's not the priest father that's on earth, and that would disqualify him from receiving that. But again, that's exactly what they're trying to do, is separate you from the direct source.
That was one that
of this election, that we're in the battle for the soul of this nation. The country is crying out for leadership. Leadership that can unite us. Leadership that brings us together.
I can't even, when I see a priest's name come up and it has the FR before his name, I can't even say it. Even in reading it, I skip over it because it's such a telltale sign that the papacy and the priesthood itself that the papacy is set up is totally illegitimate because nobody who understood their Bible and understood the magnitude of calling someone your spiritual father here on earth through a Bible lens would ever call a person their father in a spiritual sense, let alone calling the Pope the Holy Father. There's none holy and good but God. So by taking the title of Holy Father, he is literally calling himself God.
That's the first line of
should be a major problem even for Catholics.
That's the first line of the prayer Jesus gave. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be your name, which means holy. So, Holy Father, that's exactly what they're calling him.
And for a lot of people, they're so comfortable, they're so used to it. And a lot of people don't want to offend anybody. And we certainly are not looking to offend for offending's sake. But if we offend for the truth's sake, then that's between the person offended and God and not us, right? So what we're seeing here is that this old church state, the whole concept of separation of church and state stemmed from the papacy having too much power in church-state system. The results of that old system where you couldn't read, you couldn't write, you couldn't understand the Bible for yourself, you couldn't afford a Bible, you could only get it through your priest who has been, in essence, brainwashed to believe that the Pope is God and that the principles of tradition supersede the principles laid out in the scriptures, which is the Word of God. But let's review kind of a little bit about what other people experienced in this forced religious principles mindset, because that's really what unification of church and state is about. It's about forced religious principles. And we have examples of some of those in the Bible, and we'll just quickly touch on them. But what about Daniel's friend, the book of Daniel? Daniel and his friends, just Daniel's friends in this particular one, not bowing the knee to the Nebuchadnezzar golden image. Do you remember that?
And that's almost word for word of Revelation 13 if you look at it. Because it says that there was an image that was set up and they had to worship the image or they would be killed. It's the same type and antitype situation we're seeing. We see the example in the Bible and that it's going to happen again. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything's just repeating.
So what you're exactly right, that there is no new thing under the sun. And I see a lot of Christians today who either don't want to actually read their Bible or they only want to read the New Testament because the Old Testament is old. It's the Judaism. It's outdated. It's angry God. It's all this stuff, but it's all one story. You can't separate the two without totally missing the context and the connections. Yeah. And so Daniel's friends not bowing the knee, I encourage people to go back and read the scenario that they're in because that scenario is going to happen again. And when you see it, you see there's a whole bunch of higher ups in government. Imagine if you're American, you understand, imagine it's the president, the vice president, all the Congress, all the House, all his top military generals, all these top aides, everyone you could think of, all the top people there. And there's only 3 people out of hundreds that don't bow the knee to this image.
We see Revelation 13 being on full display, really. And what we're seeing from this event from December 12th is control, 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 control. They want to control every aspect of your life. What we have planned ahead of us is a planned major catastrophe.
Craig, many of our viewers know about COP28, but they have no idea what is about to transpire. But okay, I want you to give us an update on what's going on.
What's happening is that COP28 is the conference of the parties. Daniel 9:27 says, and he shall confirm a covenant with many. So I did a little research on the many, what the many means, and it means the populace or everyone. So the king that's mentioned in Daniel 9:27 will confirm a covenant with many, with everyone, for a period of 7 years, 1 week.
Now, if some people say, yeah, but haven't there been other 7-year covenants? What makes this one different?
What makes it different is it's with everyone. It's not just with Israel. It's not just with this party or that party. This one is with the whole earth. And it's for 7 years through 2030. So they have this thing marked until COP35, which is 2,550 days from December 12th.
Well, we've heard of Agenda 2030, and we knew now, from your other interviews that they were going to have, for COP28, a 7-year plan. But now they're like, excelling things with like saying we've got to push things, right away for the next 2 years. And I'm seeing articles saying that we've gone past, with the climate, that the temperature has been worse than ever before. I mean, they're acting very frantic.
Yeah, and then just within the last few days, Dubai, where they're going to do this, gets severely flooded by this huge storm, and they had several feet of water on the roads. So it's like, I go, how fitting is this that this happens right before this event? And so if they follow the storm track, it's like this is one massive storm with several feet of water everywhere.
Oh my goodness, I heard about it.
The results of that old system where you couldn't read, you couldn't write, you couldn't understand the Bible for yourself, you couldn't afford a Bible, you could only get it through your priest, who has been, in essence, brainwashed to believe that the Pope is God, and that the principles of tradition supersede the principles laid out in the scriptures, which is the word of God. But let's review kind of a little bit about what other people experienced in this forced religious principles mindset, because that's really what unification of church and state is about. It's about forced religious principles. And we have examples of some of those in the Bible, and we'll just quickly touch on them. But what about Daniel's friend, the book of Daniel? Daniel and his friends, just Daniel's friends in this particular one, not bowing the knee to the Nebuchadnezzar golden image. Do you remember that?
And that's almost word for word of Revelation 13 if you look at it. Because it says that there was an image that was set up, and they had to worship the image or they would be killed. It's the same type and antitype situation we're seeing. We see the example in the Bible, and that it's going to happen again. There's nothing new under the sun.
Protests are popping up around the world against something called 15-minute cities. What is a 15-minute city? If the World Economic Forum could lay out its perfect design for humanity, it would look like this. You would never leave your house. You would get rid of your car. You would ride your bike everywhere. You would walk to everything you needed within a 15-minute radius of your home, right? The pharmacy, the grocery store, grandma, school, everything would be within 15 minutes of your home.
Shouldn't market forces take control of that? If it's getting too crowded in a city, either people can bike or there should be some kind of innovation. There are private market forces that are at work to solve this. For the government to say, nope, you can't. Right. We need to solve it.
When government forces you into something, a way of living, when has it actually ever worked out? The answer is never. Can anyone think of an example where the government forced you to do something and it worked out?
Lockdowns, that was fun. That was sarcasm. I don't want to go back into lockdown.
Thing under the sun. And I see a lot of Christians today who either don't want to actually read their Bible, or they only want to read the New Testament, because the Old Testament is old. It's the Judaism. It's outdated. It's angry God. It's all this stuff, but it's all one story. You can't separate the two without totally missing the context and the connections. Yeah. And so Daniel's friends not bowing the knee, I encourage people to go back and read the scenario that they're in, because that scenario is going to happen again. And when you see it, you see there's a whole bunch of higher ups in government. Imagine if you're American, you understand. Imagine it's the president, the vice president, all the Congress, all the House, all his top military generals, all these top aides, everyone you could think of, all the top people there. And there's only 3 people out of hundreds that don't bow the knee to this image. And they knew that doing so was going to cost them their lives, but they did it anyway. That will be the almost exact same principle that we are going to face again. Yes, it's several thousand years ago now, that instance, but the principle is exactly the same. And the forced aspect of worship and the ability for somebody to stand in faith despite the possibility of losing their lives, all that will be exactly the same.
Yeah. We have the same thing happening in Revelation 7, Revelation 13, Revelation 14. All these tied together talks about the same thing. We have a group of people, referenced 144,000, that is not going to bow the knee and that are giving this message, this three angels message saying, hey, don't worship the beast, don't follow the system, be separate, and they will be persecuted for that.
And we because God spared him, but he was sentenced to death by being thrown in the lion's den for praying, and he didn't change any of his behaviors. He just did the same thing he did every day. The laws changed, and that was done specifically to get Daniel killed. Pharaoh sought to kill the Jews for leaving Egypt to worship God, and the remnant at the end will be sought to be killed because they will worship God and not the image that's set up. So we do see the Bible has written a lot about forced religious principle, and in every scenario, whether it was Nebuchadnezzar or I think for the lion's den, it was the king of Media,
Darius, yes.
Then the Jews leaving, like each instance shows that the other side, whether it was Pharaoh, Nebuchadnezzar, or whoever, was doing the devil's work, meaning forcing religious worship. And we see that it never is God's will to force religious principle. It always has to be done out of love and free will.
Yeah.
So that leads us to kind of the next phase, which is we know what the old church state system looks like. We know where it comes from. We know the Bible does not advocate any forced religious principle, even if, let's say you and I wanted to instill the 10 Commandments everywhere. That's a noble cause. We want people to live by it. But the second we switch over to force, we are now working for the devil. And that should be a clear trigger for anybody watching this, that the force element, even if the principles seem right, if there's force involved or compelling the conscience against one's own will, you're working for the dragon at that stage.
And that's where even in the
ABC News Special Report. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good afternoon, and we're coming on the air at this hour because President Biden is expected to unveil his strategy for this next chapter in this fight against the COVID surge sweeping across the U.S. The Delta variant now killing more than 1,000 Americans every day. The president will be revealing his 6-point plan from the White House, focusing, we believe, on increasing vaccinations, a talk of boosters, of course, schools, and the economy. He's expected to sign an executive order requiring the majority of federal employees in this country and government contractors to be vaccinated now without that option of testing, meaning vaccines. They need the vaccination in order to work, federal workers. And companies with 100 or more employees, it's believed, will also have to ensure that workers are vaccinated or tested weekly. All of this comes as the
refers to mRNA. They're referring to the computer-generated genetic sequences that can be programmed, that can program a human cell to produce viruses, spike proteins, cancers, or nearly anything. Per Pfizer's FDA approval application, they used a computer-generated Wuhan code in the COVID vaccines. All sequences are ordered from a company called Sinobiological, which is headquartered in Beijing, China. And Sinobiological manufactures and sells over 280 plus SARS-CoV-2 mRNA variants. So then we have spike proteins, our lipid nanoparticle technology bioweapons. What they call spike proteins are actually the result of lipid nanoparticle technology destroying your cells. When you take a magnetic hydrogel, you infect a biological cell, you can see that the cell is covered with all of these little spikes. This is what they're calling the spike protein. You're not infected with the virus, you're infected with a nanolipid particle technology. that then reprograms that cell to give off these biosynthetic toxins in your body.
I'm going to back up what you said here. When I interviewed Lisa McGee and Todd Callender, Lisa found through her research of all of these patents that and looking at what's in the injections, that potentially in real time any symptoms could be programmed into the body. Again, that term real time, to the body could present with any symptoms. So potentially, you know, what people have theorized is the next pandemic won't be fake in the sense that you're going to see people potentially bleeding from the mouth, nose, you know, hemorrhagic fever types. It'll be something that actually scares people, but it will actually be something that's being programmed at that time. Furthermore, the possible theory now, according to Karen Kingston and Dr. Mahiter, is that potentially even AI is going to be programming that. So it's no longer even, you know, evil humans at the helm. It's the evil humans that created AI doing it.
Yeah.
It would, you'd imagine it'd have to be an automated system to deal with billions of people at the same time. No, there's no army that would be able to monitor everyone 24/7 unless it's an automated AI, evil AI that's been developed over decades.
And that's what you need the quantum computers for in order to process that level of data.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so then we have lipids or nanotechnology. What they're calling lipids is actually self-assembling nanoparticle technology that is fully programmable. And these lipids have a cationic charge that you don't find in nature. They changed the words to fool the public. So in the early publications in 2008, the mRNA vaccine technology was just called nanoparticles, or was appropriately labeled as cationic polymers. The blanket application of the term lipid was applied before nanoparticles to make technology more appealing to the masses.
That makes sense.
So this is proof that the vaccines are technology and not biological, and it can be found in the Operation Warp Speed contract, vaccine patents, and the Pfizer documents they wanted to hide for 75 years. The Operation Warp Speed Department of Defense contract classifies the COVID injections not as biologicals, but as electromagnetic devices. The patent titled Vaccine Technology, which is a utility patent for the COVID-19 vaccines, it literally lists the components of the vaccine as a toxin from a chemical weapon and agent of biowarfare. Moderna's website defines mRNA as a software program, and they call the vaccine an operating system. Moderna has since redacted this info from their website after public exposure was brought to it, but you can still find that using the Wayback Machine. And we're going to go to this slide. You remember this? Maria,
oh, I do. How could I forget?
To you. Yeah. So quantum dot technology is in the injections, and this is what enables the higher frequency EMF communication from injected human bodies. This is where you get the Bluetooth and the quantum field frequencies, is from the quantum dots. The patents describe that the hydrogel in the COVID injections is fused with quantum dot technology. A quantum dot is a semiconductor that creates an electromagnetic field and has electronic and optical properties. They are used in quantum computing for their quantum communication properties. Luciferase and quantum dots are basically the same thing. We wrote about quantum dot technology in our book Forbidden Tech back in 2017. And what are they looking at?
So what you're looking at is mice that were injected with quantum dots in the University of Toronto experiment. And these, in this case, in this experiment, it's nano gold particles that have been turned into quantum dots, and they injected the mice with it to see what happens to these gold particles. And what they found is that these particles migrate to key organs in the body. It turns out that not only is there a natural migration, but you can actually program these quantum dots to migrate to specific points in the body, similar to that presentation you mentioned earlier, Maria. So basically, what you're looking at, these mice were subjected to, you can't see them visibly, but if you put them under black light, you can actually see the glow from the quantum dots, which also raises the question, or probably answers the question, why people are seeing black lights installed in a lot of these cities.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I remember in the middle of that last presentation, my heart sunk because we realized they can actually program the quantum dot to go, for example, to the forehead or the hand. and we didn't know, you know, what were the COVID injections the test run, or was that it? You know, you can't work unless you get this. I mean, it's pretty darn close. So, you know, again, if anyone has taken those injections that's watching and you haven't repented yet, please do so. You know, maybe you were fooled once, but you can't allow yourself to be fooled again. And the attacks are going to be coming thick and fast moving forward, because they've just, for the most part, succeeded with the greatest experiment of all time.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And, you know, I think that these injections are the mark of the beast. That's my belief, you know, with my own personal studies of the book of Revelation and with God. People say it's a precursor, but I don't see anywhere in the Bible where it says the word precursor, that there's going to be a precursor to the mark of the beast. But you know, there is still, you're absolutely right, Maria, there's still time to repent. People were fooled, they were deceived, they didn't know that this was being injected into them. They should have known, they should have listened, because a lot of people were trying to tell them, but for whatever reason, they didn't know. And you still have time. You still have time to turn your way of doing things, to repent. And, you know, as far as people say, well, you can't fix your DNA, you can't detox this out. The person that made your DNA, which is God, can fix your DNA. So I still think that we're still in that time frame. We have the window of time for people to repent and say, God, I screwed up. I didn't know what I was doing. Please help me. Please fix my DNA and get right with God.
Yes,
this is the time to get right with God. Because I think they're getting ready to do a second blow that's going to be heavier than the first. I don't think that everything's gone away. I think that there's a pause right now because they're reloading. That's what I feel, just on my spirit level.
Look, I've spoken to quite a few people.
Fact, based on available data from the summer, only 1 out of every 160,000 fully vaccinated Americans was hospitalized for COVID per day. These are the facts. So here's where we stand. The path ahead, even with the Delta variant, is not nearly as bad. Incredibly more frustrating is that we have the tools to combat COVID-19, and a distinct minority of Americans, supported by a distinct minority of elected officials, are keeping us from turning the corner. These pandemic politics, as I refer to, are making people sick, causing unvaccinated people to die. We cannot allow these actions to stand in the way of protecting the large majority of Americans who have done their part.
Why, in government, we have not to kill people, not to steal people. We have all these laws. Well, why should we be doing those and not the ones to God? Because those are between our fellow man. But the ones to God, that has to be something that individually you have to choose.
And the freedom of choice is in part what Jesus died. When Jesus died, what it allowed you to do. He allowed you, and still does allow you, to choose him. But he will not force you. Even though he died for you, He will not force you to accept that free gift. He will still allow us to choose. So there's an element of Jesus' sacrifice that was there to uplift your free will. He died for your ability to choose. When God, creator, king of the universe, he could have forced Lucifer from the beginning to essentially be wiped out and not go through this whole thing, but he didn't. And I really respect what God did there, because in the face of all power, he still chose free will and love over force. Why would that be any different today?
And now when we're looking at the New World Order system, things are going to be forced, and they will be forced by what the Bible says is actually three main powers. And it says in Revelation 16, if you want to read that.
Yeah, so these are the three main forces that we as Christians, we as citizens of the world need to watch out for. We've told you that there's a forced worship system coming. Who's behind it? Revelation 16:13. It says, "And I saw three unclean spirits like frogs." We'll talk later about what the frogs mean, maybe in a different podcast. But for now, I saw three unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, Satan, we know who that is, out of the mouth of the beast, that is the papacy with the Pope at its head, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, which we have quickly identified without breaking down in an exegesis style what the false prophet is. It is American Protestantism. Verse 14 continues. It says, "For they are the spirits of devils." So do we have any question? This is not Matt and Mackenzie's bashing on American Protestantism and Catholicism. This is Matt and Mackenzie trying to tell people exactly what the Bible is trying to tell them, but in a way that is more drawn out, because a lot of people don't spend as much time in the Word as they should. But the Bible minces no words. These are the spirits of devils.
100%. And this isn't conjecture. This isn't just assuming. Revelation can look daunting and can look complicated and hard to understand, but if you just work slowly through, and hopefully in some later episodes we'll be able to break some of these down in even more detail. Actually, we're putting out a video, and maybe this is a good place here to mention this, that is about America in prophecy. Just a short video really explaining simply how America is fulfilling in prophecy. So keep an eye out for that. If you subscribe and like, then you'll get a notification as soon as that comes out, because we're almost done that little project. But when you look at these symbols, you just go through the Bible and see where they're used, and then you can understand these frogs, these spirits, these beasts, the false prophet, all these things, and you can study for yourself. You just need your Bible. A concordance is helpful because you can look up the words and understand it completely yourself. You don't need someone to tell you. This doesn't come from a person. This is the Bible speaking line upon line. It says to study here a little and there a little. So here it said that we're going to have these three people that is going to be in this New World Order driving system, and these frogs that are coming out. And it says in verse 14, he just read it, "For these are the spirits of devils." So that's a scary thing, because this isn't God's spirit. And if we're going to start seeing spirits of devils showing up and doing things and working miracles, that's not the same America that we're seeing right now, or that we've seen when it was founded.
No. And I appreciate that the Bible gives us so much detail if we choose to explore it. So we know that these three entities are going to, that they're spirits of devils. And what do they do when these three get together finally? They go forth, verse 14 in chapter 16 of Revelation will continue. It says once they get together, they go forth to the kings of the earth and to the whole world to gather them together. That's as succinct as we could possibly get in terms of understanding what the goal is when these three get together. And we know in the mouth of two or three witnesses, the truth is established. Let's go to Revelation 17:13, where it says, okay, we see 16 says these three are going to come together and they're going to gather all the kings of the earth and the whole world to gather them together. Then Revelation 17:13 says, once they do this, they will have one mind. And once they have one mind, everybody in the world having the same basic principle of what to do, they give all their power and strength to the beast, which in essence, what this is saying is once everyone has this one mind, let's go back to Revelation 13. What did it tell us there? It says that all who should not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Could you imagine at this stage where we live and what we've grown up with, having some mandate where a small group of people are literally being chased down and killed because of what they believe, and the whole world has one mind about it and says, yeah, let's do that. That's what's coming here. And it's almost unfathomable to me, even and it's almost unfathomable to me, even though I understand and believe that this is true.
Worship means to obey someone's commandments. And key number 11, the combined beast. This beast has elements of the lion, the bear, the leopard, the dragon, and it has 7 heads and 10 horns. This is a political party or kingdom with multiple pagan religions, or a universal religion. These are the keys. Here we go. Revelation 13, starting from verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. This beast or superpower will have elements of pagan Babylon, pagan Medo-Persia, pagan Greece, and pagan Rome, as indicated by the leopard, the bear, the lion, and the dragon. This means then that this superpower will have a combined pagan religious system. In other words, it will have a universal religion. He will have the name of blasphemy on his heads, which means he will claim to be God on earth, he will claim to be the God of the Bible on earth, and he will claim to have the power to forgive sin. He will receive his power and seat and great authority from Satan and pagan Rome. Now, does that sound familiar? Let's keep reading. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? And there was given to him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So this beast receives a deadly wound. We'll talk about that later. He will be worshipped, again, meaning this will be a religious system and people will obey his commandments. And then the question pops up, who is able to make war with him? It will also be a political power. It's a combination of both religion and state, or a union of religion and state. He will be given a mouth speaking blasphemies. There goes that word again, blasphemy. So this indicates that this beast will have a figurehead or a spokesperson that will claim to be God on earth and claim to have the power to forgive sin. He will rule for 42 months. That's 1260 days. But we are talking prophecy, so that would mean that this superpower will rule for 1260 years. Let's keep going. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy, against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with a sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So again, this superpower will be blasphemous. He will claim to be God on earth and will claim to have the power to forgive sin. Now, 4 times this is mentioned. This must mean that being blasphemous is the main characteristic of this beast. He will make war with the saints. He will persecute them and overcome them, meaning he will control them and keep them captive. He is given power over the people of all nations, which means he will be a worldwide power. He will lead people into captivity, but he himself will be led into captivity. He will kill people with the sword, the Bible and the civil power, but then he himself will be killed also with the sword, the Bible and the civil power. So we have 13 main points here that will help us identify who this beast is. Point number 1. It will be a combination of multiple pagan influences. That means a universal religion. Point number 2. He will be blasphemous. He will claim to be God on earth and will claim to have the power to forgive sin. Point number 3. Satan and pagan Rome gave him his power, his seats, and great authority. Point number 4. It'll be a union of church and state, or religion and state. Point number 5. He is given a mouth, or a spokesperson, or a figurehead. Point number 6. He will reign for 1260 literal years. Point number 7. He will be a worldwide power that will persecute God's saints. Point number 8. He will lead people into captivity. Point number 9. He himself will be led into captivity. Point number 10. He will kill people with the sword, that is, the Bible and the civil power. And point number 11. He himself will be killed with the sword, the Bible, and the civil power. Point number 12. He will have a deadly wound. And point number 13. That wound will heal. So these are the 13 points that will help us identify who this beast is. And let me tell you guys real quick. Again, I'm not here to make fun of anybody. I'm not here to ridicule anybody. I'm only here to tell you guys the truth. And that's what I'm here for. There's only one entity in the world that fits all 13 points given to us in Revelation 13. And that would be the papacy. Number 1, is the papacy a combination of universal pagan religions? The Christians back in the time of Nero used to be the most persecuted people in the world. Christians used to be captured and then thrown to the lions. They were also being burned at the stake. But the Christians had this peace about them while being persecuted and killed, and people in those days admired that. The people were inspired by it so much that they wanted to become Christians as well. And so, Christians went from being the most persecuted sect to becoming the most elite. If you wanted to advance politically, you had to become a Christian to do so because they were at the top. Meanwhile, the Church of Rome used to be a good church. Then they had this idea to try and evangelize the heathens of those days, which was easy to do because most heathens in those days wanted to convert to Christianity anyway for political gains. And so, paganity with paganism. They brought in elements of pagan Babylonian concepts, pagan Persian concepts, pagan Greek concepts, pagan Roman concepts, Norse mythology, Celtic mythology, Egyptian mythology, you name it. They even started worshiping the sun on the day of the sun, or Sunday, instead of worshiping God on the Sabbath. This was the main theme of paganism. It's sun worship. They began to bring in idolatry. The statue of Jupiter was renamed after Peter. The statue of Hermes became Christ the Good Shepherd. Statues of the Madonna and Child became the glorification of the Virgin Mary and Jesus as an infant. The Church of Rome became the Catholic Church, which means universal church. It was like an open invitation for any and every religion to come in and add into the church their own pagan concepts. And we see this happening with the same exact church today. So is the papacy a combination of universal pagan religions? It is. Number 2. Is the papacy blasphemous? Did they claim to be God on earth? Did they claim to rule or speak and legislate rules for God on earth? Did they claim to have the power to forgive sin? The Archbishop of Venice, prior to becoming Pope Pius X, the Bishop of Rome, is not only the representative of Jesus Christ, but he is Jesus Christ himself, hidden under the veil of flesh. Does the Bishop of Rome speak? It is Jesus Christ who speaks. The head of this system claims to be God on earth. In fact, the word Pope means Father. He even calls himself the Holy Father. Does it claim to rule for God on earth? The Great Encyclical Letters to Leo XIII, page 304. We hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty. It claims to rule for God on earth. Does it claim to have the power to forgive sin? Dignity and Duties of the Priest, page 34. Were the Redeemer, Jesus Christ, to descend into a church and sit in a confessional to administer the sacrament of penance, and a priest to sit in a confessional, Jesus would say over each penitent, Ego te absolvo, which is Latin for I forgive you. The priest would likewise say over each of his penitents, Ego te absolvo, and the penitents of each would be equally absolved. What they are trying to say is that if Jesus forgives me of my sins and a Catholic priest forgives you of your sins, we are both equally forgiven. Is that blasphemy? That is blasphemy. The papacy was and still is blasphemous. Number 3. Did pagan Rome give the papacy its seat and authority? The History of the Christian Church, Volume 3, page 327. The Roman Church-state power became supreme in Christendom in 538 AD due to a letter of the Roman Emperor Justinian known as Justinian's Decree, which set up and acknowledged the Bishop of Rome as the head of all churches. It gave the Roman Church state political power, civil power, as well as ecclesiastical power. This letter became part of Justinian's Code, the fundamental law of the empire, and that year, Pope Vigilius ascended the throne under the military protection of Belisarius. So who gave the Pope his power, seat, and authority? It was pagan Rome. This brings us to point number 4. Is the papacy a union of church and state? Well, the Vatican established its authority in AD 538 as the political power and ecclesiastical power. The Vatican is also the only church in the world that has its own government. In fact, the Vatican is the only church that even has its own army. The papacy is a union of church and state. Number 5. Does it have a man as a figurehead or a spokesperson? That would be the Pope. Number 6. Did the papacy reign for 1260 years? Remember, the papacy officially gained its power, seat, and great authority from pagan Rome in the year 538 AD. And then in the year 1798 AD, Napoleon became sick and tired of taking orders from the papacy, and he sent one of his top generals named Berthier to arrest the Pope and then claimed Rome and ended the Roman Church state. If you do the math, 538 AD to 1798 AD, that would be 1260 years. Number 7. Was the papacy a worldwide power that made war with God's people? The Roman Church state has shed more Christian blood than any other institution that has ever existed on earth via the Inquisition. Over 100 million Christians were killed by the papacy during a time called the Dark Ages. You know why they called it the Dark Ages? Because the Bible was illegal. If this power caught you with a Bible in your hands, you are immediately taken in for heresy and you are tortured and eventually killed. Which leads us to the last few points. Did the papacy lead people into captivity? Again, the papacy led God's saints into captivity during the Inquisition. Was the Pope himself led into captivity? We know that in 1798, the Pope himself, who had been leading Christians into captivity, was led into captivity by General Berthier. He was then exiled. Did the papacy kill with the sword, the Bible, and civil power? Well, during the Dark Ages, the papacy took the Bible away from the common people and twisted scripture as a means to prove that those true, God-fearing, and commandment-keeping Christians were heretics. Then the papacy, through the Inquisition, killed God's saints with the civil power. Number 11, was the papacy killed with the sword, the Bible, and the civil power? Now, if you are a Christian, you are most likely a Protestant. Most Christian denominations are Protestants. Just take some time to research and dig up your church history, and you will soon learn about the roots of Protestantism. A man named Martin Luther, one night, got struck by lightning. So he prayed to a dead saint for salvation, and in return, he would dedicate his whole life to the church, and so his life was preserved, and he did exactly what he said he would do. He thoroughly dedicated himself and became a monk. Then he started doing weird rituals because he was obsessed with wanting his sins to be forgiven. Although some of his ideas weren't biblical, God still worked with him. One day, a verse came to his mind. The just shall live by faith, not by works, nor rituals. The just shall live by faith. He was mind blown because he had been doing these rituals and they were all in vain. He came to the realization that the Catholic Church have been teaching a whole slew of things that were not biblical at all. And so he protested the church and nailed 95 theses on the church door about the unbiblical things that the church was teaching. Of course, there were more than 95, but he couldn't fit them all on the church door. The Protestant movement began and people started to really dig deep in the Bible and realized that Martin Luther had just embarked on a whole new truth that people have never heard of before, because nobody taught those things that we can only find in the Bible. Soon after, people started to realize through diligent Bible study that the papacy was the little horn of Daniel 7 and the sea beast of Revelation 13. The papacy's power to control the minds of the people went on a steady decline because of the truth of God's word. The papacy was killed with the sword, the Bible. Was the papacy also killed with the civil power? Again, we all know that in the year 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte was sick and tired of taking orders from the Pope, and so he sent his general, General Berthier, to arrest the Pope. Then finally, the Pope was killed by the sword, the civil power, when he died during exile. This leads us to the next point. Did the papacy have a deadly wound? Even though the papacy was still around, its power died when the Pope was arrested and killed. This was the deadly wound. And now the Bible says that the papacy's wound would be healed. In the year 1929, Mussolini was the one who reinstated the papacy's power. Although not fully, the papacy's wound began to heal. Now remember, this beast has elements of a leopard, a bear, a lion, and a dragon. These are predators, fierce and strong animals that attack their prey. A predator does not attack when deadly wounded, but as soon as it is fully healed and hungry, it will strike again. The question now is, when will the papacy's deadly wound fully heal?
The thing up to the culmination at the end, and we are very close to the end, we believe. And we have this New World Order system. All through all the chapters, we see this coming. We see that Revelation 13, we have these powers coming together. Revelation 14 is a message against those powers to not fall for it. Revelation 15 is a continuation of how all these things have been taking place since 1798 and onward. And then we have 16, which talks about this threefold union of these powers, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. And then 17 is the exact same thing. So this theme is being pushed all throughout here. And it's like you said, how can we even believe that in America we're going to be going around chasing people and trying to put them to death? For what? For not following the system. But you have to remember that they're conditioning people to understand these people differently. These people will be viewed as dangerous to society, dangerous to the world as a whole, to the collective. So it's not going to be, oh, there's these, friendly little people and we just want to kill them for fun. It's going to be put in a totally different light because we have, now when this is going off on a little bit separate track, but maybe I'll mention it. In the same chapter, Revelation 16, is the plagues that are going to be falling on the world. And there's going to be destruction, there's going to be things that are happening, and they will then take those situations.
What it was all about. So the idea going around is that Pfizer, the name of the pharmaceutical company, when you spell it backwards, is the name of an ancient Near Eastern underworld god or Hebrew demon. This guy, commonly known as Reshef, a god of plagues and of the underworld. The same deity is elsewhere called Rasap, Rashapa, Raship, Mashmash, and Ershapa.
And say to the people who don't want to follow the system, oh, all these things are happening because of them. They're destroying this, they're doing these bad things, they're the ones calling for all these plagues to be happening. If we just got rid of these guys, heaven on earth would happen. Which is basically the plan. That's Satan's plan, that heaven is actually here. God is coming here. We're not going up to heaven, that heaven's going to be created through this new world order system, this ecumenical movement, and then and that's exactly what they're trying to do. God will appear, Satan will appear as an angel of light. Now, we're probably getting ahead of ourselves, but we're going to talk about this in future podcasts. But these are very important things that we need to be talking about.
And helping people outside of ourselves understand these things. Because back to that quote where no one's going to believe that what we're saying here is true or that this shift is coming to America. You're going to say that this is absurd and not possible. But the fact of the matter is, not only is it possible, it is going to happen. And the only way we can prepare is by understanding where we got this information to begin with, because it also tells you how to manage and deal with these things. That includes a health message in keeping your body and mind right, able to receive God's Holy Spirit. It includes a country living message, which is to be able to provide for yourself by God's grace away from the cities while still working to help those in the cities. And it also takes an understanding of the prophecies and of the law of God.
For the world at large, normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population. I mean, and we're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the veins. We just shoot them right into the vein.